My name is Patty Bernard. I am a member of the Nevada Women's History Project. Today is Tuesday, December 13, 2022. We are here in Reno, Nevada, and we are speaking with Shayne Del Cohen. Thank you. Welcome, Shayne.
Thanks for the invitation.
This interview is being brought to you by the Ericson Family Trust Foundation. Shayne, I know that in your early years, your formative years, you really had an interesting life. Can you talk a little bit about your family and your early schooling?
Sure. I was born in San Rafael, California, in Cottage Hospital, which burned down after that. And we moved to Oakland, California, when I was 2. My parents were first generation, second generation of immigrant parents, with all those little things that go with it, one of which include saying that children should do better than their parents. If you've seen Fiddler on the Roof, you know that the first generation iteration, and now we're in a whole different world. My mom was a teacher in the Oakland School District. My dad was a diamond setter and a very creative person who did art and sculpture on the side. Got a lot of love of learning, work ethic, etc. from them. Went to Oakland Public Schools, graduated Skyline High School with the first class that went through this new school. We're very tight. We're still all friends. I hang out with my kindergarten classmates. Even though there's a mileage distance between some, there are many in the Reno area now. I went to Davis to do pre-med. Got lots of interesting stories about that, but decided I didn't want to be an old lady when I graduated, and joined Vista. I mentioned immigrant grandparents, and they, of course, came from different places in Eastern Europe, mostly Russia. And my grandfather was one of those people. They hijacked a train and went to Germany and sailed across the United States. There's all kinds of stories, but most Americans, except Native Americans, have some of that background. And I don't understand people today that benefited from this country, that come from immigrant origins, that turn around and deny others the same thing.
You were talking about Davis and a medical career, and yet you wind up in Nevada as a Vista worker. There must be a story there.
There's a big story there. I'm a child of the 60s. And for some of the younger audience, you won't know the energy and the passion that came from that. We were getting tied up in Vietnam. My class graduated in June of 1964. Gulf of Tonkin resolution was August. So people that hadn't gone to college or gotten a job right out of high school were drafted. We had a lot going on in this country. My thing was sit-ins, okay, became a social thing. What were people doing? Nothing. Peace Corps, overseas. Why are we going overseas to countries to tell them how to live when there are things in our own country that weren't exactly right? There was Vista. I joined Vista. You put in an application, and in those days, it's very different now, you got put in a pool and picked and sent somewhere. I got sent to Fallon, Nevada. The Vistas that came to work for Intertribal Council, which was a coalition of all the tribes in Nevada at the time, worked in all sorts of community development efforts. This interview is not about the 200 years of tribal United States government interface, but until that time, until the OEO, Office of Opportunity, came about, tribes didn't have control of their own funds, and everything was orchestrated by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. OEO gave communities, including rural communities and counties like Washoe and Clark County, the opportunity to create programs and hire local people to do things in their own community. So Vista workers in the early days were basically interpreters and resource developers, saying, here's an opportunity. For instance, there's this program called Head Start. We can create preschools for your kids. Later on, there was, let's build a building. Let's formalize your tribal council into a real government. just all kinds of issues all over the place. It was a very exciting time in our country. I don't think we'll ever see something like that again. I'd like to say that Nevada was a very different place in 1966 than it is today. We worked on clean water systems, electricity, housing, things that people take for granted today. A paved road, oh my gosh.
I know that you're not a native, but do you consider yourself a native? And how did that happen?
Well, when I came to Nevada, as I said, it was a very different place, and communities were very small. Everybody knew everybody. I can tell a story about one day somebody calling the BIA in Carson and asking where I was. Oh, she's home with the measles in Fallon, you know. I was just really fortunate. I grew up in Oakland in a community that was close-knit, tight, and came to Nevada, and reservations are close-knit, tight, and I got adopted by the Hicks family, and got a second time to grow up with 4 amazing sisters, and later on another Vista worker became our brother. So it's just been family and life all along.
You speak about working with the government entities. Did you work specifically with families?
I'm not quite sure what you mean by families, but the whole thing is to take a community and see what its aspirations are, what they consider their needs, and work with them to do it.
You spoke about working with government entities, but did you have, in addition to your family, your native family that you entered into, did you work specifically with other native families?
Oh, all the time. That's all we did, was work with the communities and the people at a grassroots level. That's what the war on poverty was all about, was not the upper level of government, mid-level managers, but having people do for themselves what they needed to do. Later on, I became the talent search director for Intertribal Council, which was a counseling program to keep kids in high school and then go on to post-secondary, and that was one-on-one with families. And you have to realize at that time, going back several decades, a lot of the parent generation had never gone to public school and were intimidated by public school instructors, counselors in particular, and some principals. And there's a lot of those Nevada stories we don't need to tell here today, but they didn't know how to provide the structure or the kinds of things their kids needed to go on and to stay in school. And if they'd never been to college, they didn't know about entrance requirements, and a lot of the school counselors at that time would not exactly put those kids in the right program or give information with deadlines, et cetera, and the financial aid system was not conducive to helping some of them also. There's a story about one particular grammar school in which the Indian kids were not learning to read, not progressing, et cetera. And so again, working with the community, we started the Duckwater Indian School, which was an amazing adventure for the community and academically for the kids. And those kids excelled, once they had their own school, into equating and exceeding some of the standard achievement levels of other Nevada rural schools. Now, my story that's really personal here is the superintendent of that particular county did not like that very much and started rumors around the state. And of course, the superintendents all met monthly. And so I was seen, according to him, lying in the streets of Tonopah, drunk out of my mind and without appropriate attire. I didn't like that very much. People that know me know that I was not prone to drinking beer and lying in the streets. And so I visited with that person and we came to an understanding. And I decided after interviewing that person that they had their own problems, which unfortunately came out later on. And after several tragedies in this person's life, they kind of came back. And 12 years later, in a meeting of county superintendents, publicly apologized to me, which I thought took a lot.
After Vista, where did you go next?
Well, one of the things you learn when you're in Vista and working with feds, et cetera, is if you don't have a degree, you're a non-entity. And in those days also, if you were female, you had other little ropes to climb. Having a name Shayne always got me in the door. So I found a school called Friends World College, and by that time I wanted a degree in community development, something to do with development of non-industrialized communities. And in the United States at the time, there were only about 7 universities doing programs like that, but they were all urban development. And I found Friends World College, which was a experiment in education by the New York Meeting of Friends at the time, that allowed you to go to different places around the world and develop your own curriculum. And so I got to go study community development exercises in Mexico, Kenya, India, and then I did some independent study in Vietnam and Korea. Patty, there is nothing like standing on a corner in a different culture, in a different place, and standing there for an hour. What you learn in that hour can equate to more than 4 years in an academic institution in the United States. So yes, that was a marvelous adventure, and we don't have time here to tell you all the things that I see and did, but it was amazing.
You spoke one time about being in, I believe it was Kenya, when the men landed on the moon.
Actually, I was in Tanzania, but that's okay. Oh, the shot went up, and everybody was amazing. You're right, it was Kenya. I was sitting under a tree with an African tribal chairman who was very well educated, and he said to me, "You're a young American. What do you think of this moonshot?" And of course, in the United States, there was a lot of controversy. Why are we spending all this money shooting into space when we have issues here on our own continent? And he said to me, "Well, I'm going to tell you something. That moonshot is going to do more for my people than 10 decades of Peace Corps or all this other stuff." He says, "Why?" He says, "Because my people believe that the moon is a god. And you certainly don't step on a god's face." And I'll tell you one more thing. He said, when they come down, and they will come down safely, I know that, there is going to be an outpouring or PR and everything to deny that this ever happened. Sure enough, they went up, they came down safely, and there was leafleting all over the country of airplanes flying and letting out papers saying this never happened. It was an imagination of the United States. I have to tell you, one of the more interesting days was being in the USIA building in Dar es Salaam when they came down, and there was a capsule display in there, and the kids were having a great time, and they felt really comfortable and were running around, and the parents' generation were all just gawking. But the agency did the broadcast of the landing in both English and Swahili, so everybody heard it in their own language. And following that, I ended up in Nepal, and that was really fun because it's the first time I was ever with people of my same height. And they kept coming up and shaking your hand like, "Congratulations, congratulations, this is so exciting." Well, you know, we didn't do it, but we did it.
What brought you back to Nevada? You were a California girl. How did you come back to
Well,
this
I was
state?
sitting in a Sikh temple in Kampala, Uganda, and I got a letter from my dad saying, "There's a crack in the street." And that is another whole story, but eventually our street slid, 22 houses slid down into the creek, and it was a result of the Mormon temple construction in Oakland. whole different story. So my parents left the country and went to Australia. I came home. Home means Nevada, and certainly the res and family and the whole community, that was home.
And from that period in your life, what did you do next? Did you continue schooling?
As I said, I was the talent search director for Intertribal Council statewide program. We reduced the dropout rate of kids from 50% to 12% in 3 years, and really increased the number of post-secondary students going to school. At that time, in University of Nevada, Reno's history, they'd only graduated 4 Indians in 100 years. Again, and I started a program, a lot of the teacher aides and the kindergarten teachers and librarians in particularly the rural school districts became started or staffed by Indian persons through Title I, etc. Those people were paid a salary based on just an hourly wage, minimum wage, and they only worked 30 hours a week, so they, quote, had no advancement. And how do you advance people? Well, in school administration, it's through earning credits. Mature people, family people, could never leave the res and go to UNR for 4 years. They needed something in between. The Community College Act had been passed at that time, and rather than what we see today, the law stated don't bring the students to the college, bring the college to the students. So we started some community college programs in the central area where people could come on the weekend and begin to earn credits. Well, Nevada State Department of Education said I didn't know what I was doing because I didn't have a master's. And so we had to hire somebody with a master's to sit in the room so the credits would transfer. And I said, well, I can get a master's. That's not difficult. So I went to school for international training in Brattleboro, Vermont, which was another great program where you are on campus doing Harvard B School type business and administration courses. And then you get to go anywhere in the world you want for 6 months to do whatever you want. And since I consider that I had a fairly good social service, community development background at that point, I wanted more in business. And so I repped a Wall Street firm brokering shrimp and rubber in Southeast Asia.
That must have been interesting.
Never dull.
Was this a culture shock, or had you your previous international experience giving you the impression it was kind of the same?
It's the same. It's a whole big world, and it's just different. You can go in a city, you can go around a block and be in a totally different architectural or cultural environment. You can go from town to town in this country, and they used to be all different. They're getting a little more McDonaldized, but that's another issue. It was just fun and exciting, and you learned something every day, and people were great.
I know we're skipping over a great deal of your history at this point, but I want to make sure that we cover the contrast between the Native American experiences that you have gone through, and then you are now involved with African American, our story. How did
that evolve
to that area?
A lot of my work, which we haven't covered, had to do with obtaining rights, obtaining recognition, having people tell their own story, or like with a lot of oral histories, being able to prove it legally later on. And while at Syncat, I met Ken Dalton, and he expressed an interest in doing something to enhance and bring to fore the history and the legacy of African Americans in northern Nevada. And so we formed and at the same time, Bertha Woodard had died, and NAACP from New York came swooping in and wanted to take all her stuff to New York, and we said, no, 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 that belongs here. And we began our story.
Now I'm going to take you back to your those years that were in between leaving and our story, Syncat and some of those experiences.
There was a wonderful phenomenon for a little while called Syncat, Sierra Nevada Community Access Television. And this was a national effort to have communities develop their own television studios, media centers, because journalism was suffering across the country. We're going through the same thing again. But anyway, we had Syncat, and the Progressive Leadership Alliance of Nevada had started a show called We the People. And to make a long story short, I ultimately became the hostess, and ultimately they declined their sponsorship and other people picked it up. But we had a long-term running 15 years of documenting and interviewing local community efforts, as well as, for me, some national figures that came on and spent time with us. Harry Reid was a wonderful guest. He, of course, loved the publicity, but it was a different kind of show, and we would talk for 28 minutes with some amazing people, or people that were doing things in the community that other people needed to know.
Was this statewide, your speakers, or was this more Northern Nevada?
It was totally concentrated on the local community, Sierra Nevada Community Access Television. And if anybody's interested, there's 600 hours of tape of different community activists, community leaders, community people with concerns at UNR Special Collections. We talked about talent search and then getting a master's, and after that I came back to Nevada. Like I said, Nevada was home, and somewhere in there I was the resource developer for Intertribal Council, just raising funds to do programs. And then I did a stint in Arizona, New Mexico for a school for handicapped kids called the School for Me, and that became sort of one of my things I got known for, was taking a group that was going to lose its funding or was having administrative problems and going in and getting it back together. And I got 2 opportunities out of that, or I needed to know what I was going to do after that. And one was the Indian Healthcare Act of 1972 came about, and actually Nevada got some substantial funding, and also I got invited to be a White House fellow applicant. And so I applied to both of them. And all of a sudden I had neither. Well, it turns out my letter for the White House interview went to Idaho. Nobody ever figured that one out. And I got hired to be the health planner for Reno Sparks Indian Colony, but nobody told me because everybody assumed somebody else had. And I just happened to arrive home because I was homesick one weekend, and everybody said, "Congratulations, welcome home." And I'm going, "What's going on?" And somebody said, "Excuse me," and made a phone call and found out nobody told me I was hired, and they expected I was home because I was starting the next week. Well, I started a month later. And I was the health planner, and we created the first tribal health center, tribally owned, controlled health center at the Reno Sparks Indian Colony. Several others were created subsequently. Tribe like that, I went on and did a lot of different planning efforts with them, and there's not enough time to tell you all the adventures we had, from legislation nationally, statewide, locally, and things we did inside. Probably the most notable to me, and that I'm proudest of, is working with the Securities, SEC, Securities, I can't remember the acronym, Commission at the federal level to allow tribes to create investment programs that were not supervised by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. In other words, invest in themselves. And we did the Hungry Valley legislation, which created some extra land in northern Reno Sparks area for the new colony, because the population was expanding and people needed a place to live. And after that,
I think SEC is Security Exchange Commission.
There you go. Thank you. I just
Just
couldn't
a-
get the E. Yes. And that was done with a Wall Street firm. Again, another long story. And then in 1988, I became Lance Astor, who was an incredible human being and my boss of 10 years, was the chairman of Reno Sparks Indian Colony, a very special individual, and he would loan me out to other tribes all the time. And there's a Nevada word for that, but we won't use it here. And so in 88, I just became a private freelance consultant and had subsequent adventures all over the United States.
Obviously, books and experiences, mentors have had a great role in your life. Tell us about some of them.
I think my favorite story, or the thing that maybe makes part of my personality, is being in Mexico in 1968 when the Olympics were held in Mexico City. I was never there. We were 200 miles away in Morelia. But at the conclusion of one of the events, which was probably the quarter-mile event, I don't remember, but there were two American athletes that came in first and third, Tommy Jones and Juan Carlos. And when they stood on the podium, they raised their fists, and it caused an international scandal. But they got a lot of press attention, and one of the journalists asked them, "What does it feel like to be the best quarter-miler in the world?" And one of them said, 568 million Chinese don't know I'm alive. That was, to me, the most humble and appropriate statement, because what it means is you do your best at what you do, but others may never know about it, and they won't even know who you are. So you just do your thing. And those two gentlemen suffered much in their life. Historically now they've been revived. University of San Jose State University created a wonderful life-size bronze of them. And with the permission of the guy that came in second, who was German, the statue has the first and the third place life-size men, and the second place podium is left empty, so that kids can climb on it and get the feel of the power of doing your very best, even though others may not know.
What's the driving force in your life? You seem to be always in motion.
Well,
what makes you tick?
What makes me tick? Well, the many things, but one is, as, quote, a young American, or an American in this time and place in society, we have the best of a lot of things. And so we still need to make the world a better place. And that's just always been part of me. I can think of being in the stinky junior high gym, watching John F. Kennedy be inaugurated in January of 1961, and saying, ask not what you can do, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And as a 13-year-old, that was pretty foundation.
And you think that was the motivator for you expanding far beyond Oakland, California?
Like I said, in the 60s, I was very perturbed about, and have continued to be perturbed at different levels, of people going to different places and saying you should live a certain way, or you should be a certain kind of thing. And you watch culture conflicts and international wars come because of that. And so I've always looked at, well, what's good in this particular community? What can they build upon? What are their hopes and aspirations? And if you can assist, you do that. If you have language skills, which I had at one time and some people haven't, you do that. If you have a personality that's kind of like, don't tread on me, you use that. Harold Wyatt, who was the original, or not the original, but the director of Intertribal Council for most of my years there, used to call me the poison pen, because I could identify a situation and probably what the resolution was, and was not afraid to approach people with that.
What do you think your most significant contribution might be?
That's a real stumper for me. I just think that living a life that can provide people an example of what can and can be done is part of that. I've had a wonderful life, and I encourage other people to not be afraid to do the things that they would like to do or they think they can do, to do them.
Shayne, how would you like to be remembered? And also, who is going to carry on your legacy work? Is there some group or some folks in the future that you hope might continue after you?
Well, the times I came from were very different, and some of the challenges of today and the techniques and the tools of today are very different. However, I do publish a daily journal to Indian country, and we're in the 5,000th edition, and so I get all kinds of information and look at things all over the country, and I see a whole generation, or 2 generations really, of articulate, motivated people that are doing their own thing. I'm not worried about that. It's really exciting. There are Native Americans in every sector of American society today, from astronauts down to those community people that just keep things together. But I did want to say, when you asked about legacy or summary, is I always took Malcolm Forbes's headstone statement, made it my gender, and said, "While alive, she lived."
Do you have a story that might be motivational for a young woman of the future, that an experience that you have gone through?
I can tell an old Fallon story. Again, a different time, a different place, but a lot of people didn't like the fact that the tribe was gaining cohesiveness and doing things and not being beholden to people and not getting into debt to people, et cetera, et cetera. So one day when I was driving into town, a car came out of town, and there was something sticking out of the side of the window. To make a long story short, it was a rifle, and they aimed the gun, but they figured the speeds of the car wrong. So the bullet came in this way, not straight into my forehead. And I'm pretty good in emergencies, and then you fall apart 3 days later. And it was, oh my gosh, I shouldn't be here. There's a lot of things that were running against me, but here I am, so let's go on. And you just live every day that you can.
And the reason you think that you received a bullet in your window was?
Because a lot of people don't like change. And you see this all around you. And what's tearing our society up right now is some people that don't want to lose control or their idea of who they are or where they are. But if they're oppressing people, if they're precluding humans from exercising all those particular components of a human being that, quote, separates them from the animal and the insect kingdoms, that's not right.
And do you see that that is changing? People are more susceptible to change nowadays?
I think people expect change. People politically run on it and then don't. Yeah, but the world has always been evolving, and we keep forgetting that we're just a little tiny speck on an amazing ball that's rolling around, and we're still walking upright. That's in the middle of a galaxy, and now with all the space exploration, more and more galaxies. We're just a little tiny speck. But we have this wonderful life that we've been given to live. I brought with me a message from a plaque I have hanging in my house. A leader is best when the people hardly know that he exists. Less good when they praise and obey him. Worse when they fear and despise him. When his aim is met, his dream fulfilled, they will say, "We did this ourselves." That's from Lao Tzu. Additionally, I have a cup that says, and was given to me by Anna Mae Berry, and it says, "If it's going to be, it's up to me." We didn't talk about archives and records and libraries and museums and all this, but thank you so much for the invitation.
Well, it is our pleasure. Thank you so much for coming and talking with us.